Legends and Masters Academy, another exclusive interview just for you guys. Thank you for following. I'm very fortunate to have today Mr. Louie Bauzo. Louie Bauzo is an excellent musician, and he has some other interesting things we'll talk about in a minute. Louie, thank you for taking the time.
Well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
We're in Tokyo, Japan. We've been playing at the Tokyo Blue Note with Larry Harlow's Latin Legend Band, and so far so good. So Louie, I know some of your background, but I don't know all of your background. Tell us a little bit about your history. Who have you played with? You know, how old were you when you started playing?
Well, let me begin by saying that I was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and I came here at a young age, 4 or 5 years old. And my father was he sang second voice and played rhythm guitar and like the trios and stuff like that. So that's where I got my first influences at home. His friends would come over on the weekends and all that and have a few drinks, play cards and whatever, and then practice some of the tunes that we're going to do at the nightly gigs and what have you. And I was raised in the Lower East Side, in the projects, the Leland Wall projects. And then as a teenager moved to Brooklyn, in Brownsville. My father owned a home in there. My father was like an everyman. He did construction. At that time, it was the beginning of air conditioning and that kind of thing. He got into that. He also got into repairing televisions. He was like one of the first hi-fi enthusiasts. You know what I mean? He built his own amplifier.
So that's where you get it from.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, with all the gadgets and how things work and taking things apart and that kind of thing. And but I began playing professionally. I was 14 years old. I used to play with the trios and stuff, and my father's friends would come over, because everybody, they bounced around different groups, different trios and that. And there was a whole series of clubs in Brooklyn on Myrtle Avenue, La Vega, and Metropolitan, a bunch of different clubs, and Marion Manor, Marion Mansion. That they always
You were playing bongos when you started?
Yeah, because it was in the trios that I learned how to play. And then, I was 14 years old. I guess you could call it, I was getting paid, so that's
Makes you
professional. Makes me a professional, right? And I always remember my mother telling the guys, well, you take them, you bring them back. You know what I mean? This kind of thing, because I was really young. I mean, I was tall for my age, and at 14 I already had a little mustache, kind of thing. So there was, since I was going in with them, there was no big deal at the clubs. Matter of fact, that's how I got into the Palladium. I never played at the Palladium, but I used to go to the Palladium and hang out and stuff, And I was a young guy. I would sneak in, kind of thing, You walk in and
Make believe you're older.
Make believe you're older kind of thing, yeah. That's how you wind up doing that, yeah. And started playing with a lot of local bands in Brooklyn and stuff. There was a group called Cholo Rivera. That he was 1 or 2 years older than me, and he already had started a little group. And we would play, the local church dances and that kind of policeman balls, that kind of thing. Is
Cholo still around?
Oh yeah.
Because that name,
yeah.
I know that name.
Yeah. And the first name band that I was associated with was Joe Quijano. And that came about as interesting because I got a part-time job. I was still in high school. I went to Seward Park downtown on Grand Street. And I was working for this Japanese trading company. And my job was, they would send all these, the transistor radios and all those things.
Yep.
And those cheap-ass batteries that they had in them, we had to take them out and replace them with American batteries. So all I did all day was open thousands of bags with these radios, open the radio, take the battery out. It was those 9-volt batteries, those square things, and put newer batteries in. But also working there was a gentleman by the name of Herman Gonzalez.
I knew Herman.
Yeah. And he was a trumpet player with Joe Quijano. And he realized that, I was into music and I played with different groups and that kind of thing. He said, oh, you should come hang around with us and all that. I said, oh, you play bongos? Because, Joe Quijano didn't have a bongo player, per se. He did the thing like Johnny Pacheco with playing the little bongos on the stand with the stick kind of thing. Yeah. And so Herman said, "Oh, come around. You'll play once in a while and whatever. You know, Joe will let you play." And so that's how I became associated with
Was Joe calling the band Conjunto Cachana?
That was Cachana. And that was, when I started coming around, that was when they had exploded.
La Pachanga.
La Pachanga, but it was also a big hit called, it was like a medley, Nosotros and La Media Vuelta. That was a big hit.
Yeah.
And so the band was playing all over the place. We used to do all those clubs in the Bronx, you know, Bronx Casino, Tropicoro.
Good, keep talking. I'm just
Oh,
making sure it's recording.
Yeah. Yeah, Tropicoro was that place on Hunts Point that was owned by the boxer, Carlos Ortiz.
Right.
And all the bands used to play there. And but I had the most fun in one of the few places that I enjoyed was the Bronx Casino. That was on 149th Street.
Mm-hmm.
And
right off 3rd Avenue.
yeah. And they had like a balcony. So in between sets, I would go up there and watch the other bands. Mm-hmm. And that's the first time I saw the Machito Orchestra was in the Bronx Casino.
Federico Pagani, right? He was the owner?
Well, he was one of the promoters. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if he was one of the owners, but there were different promoters.
It later
yeah. Like, it was in later years. Yeah. And of course, at that time, you know, in the '60s, we had all the big like hotels, the Manhattan Center, the St. George in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. And those are those dances that were like $3. You would get there before 8 o'clock, and it was like 20 bands. You know what I mean? So that's how I saw all the bands. Was in all those dances, and so that, like I said, the Jokiano was the first like name band that I was associated with, and then in 1967, before I went to the service, the last group I played with was Orquesta Son, Paul Ortiz. Mm-hmm. And it was during that period that I met Jose Madera.
Okay.
Yeah, because like I said, I was from the Lower East Side, but my family, they all lived in El Barrio, my aunts and uncles and all that. And then, like in the summer, I would come to the Barrio and spend the summer here.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Paul Ortiz, Tender Love and Sweet Caresses.
That's exactly right.
That was a big hit of his,
Yeah.
and that was Jose Madera's arrangement?
Yeah. And that was, I think, might have been Jose's first production.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, when I was coming up, that was one of the tunes that my older brother used to listen to, and it had nice trumpet parts, so that kind of attracted my ear.
Yeah, that was Joe's arrangement. Yeah.
I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, but that's cool. And then that's how I met Joe. I used to come to the summer, and then my cousin, Papo, had, you know, because we lived on 119th Street, and he lived on 118th Street. And so one day my cousin was telling me, "Oh, I know, I met this guy, he's a musician, blah, blah, blah." And I told him that my cousin, you know, played, and he said he wanted to meet you, and that's how I met Jose. I was like 16, 17 years old, and he was like 2 years younger than me. And that's how we met. And then, of course, you know, hanging out and listening to the music. We used to go to his house. I remember he had these little speakers that didn't even have a case. It was just a bare speaker connected to an amplifier thing. And we would play the 78s and all of that, and listen to the sax guajeos and all that, analyze the music, that kind of thing. So, you know, he was into the history too. And, of course, his father played in the band. And he would tell me, "Oh, the band's rehearsing tomorrow. Let's go over there," and blah, 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 that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Machito band.
Yeah, the Machito band. That was like... And then I went to the service, and I came back in '70. And the first band when I came out was with Johnny Colon. And as a matter of fact, I was with Johnny Colon like a little over 2 years, and that's when I first met Larry Harlow, because Larry Harlow had produced his album. It's called Caliente de Vicio, Hot, Hot, Hot. Mm-hmm. And there was a big hit on there called Merecumbe.
Johnny Colon.
Yeah, Johnny Colon.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a big hit.
Yeah. And
Boogaloo Blues was before that?
That was before that.
Okay.
Boogaloo Blues was before that.
So Johnny was already hot.
Yeah,
and then he got even hotter.
Yeah,
with,
that's right.
Merecumbe.
Yeah. That was a big hit for him. Mm-hmm. And then during that period, that's also where I met Johnny Almendra. He had just begun studying and playing and all that. Another music enthusiast, and we used to come to my house and, you know, talk about the records and play all this, because I was always a collector. And we would play all these tunes and talk about Cuban music and the trios from Puerto Rico and all those kind of things. and because his father was a composer. His father wrote tons of boleros and stuff like that. So he had a musical, family also, a musical family history. And as a matter of fact, his brother-in-law was Phil Peters, a well-known promoter at the time.
I know.
So we used to go.
Phil's still alive, right?
Yeah, he lives in Florida. Yeah. And we used to go. That's another venue how we got into dances. We used to go with him on the weeknights, real late, clandestine, putting up posters. Those big signs, post no bills, and guess what we were doing? Posting bills all over the place. And because of that, we'd get into all the dances and that kind of thing. So there was music all the way around, in terms of the exposure and all that. So me and Johnny, one day I just, I think it was time for a change. So me and Johnny said, you know what, let's go make our own band. And we left Johnny Colon. And that's when we created Tambo. And we started, I remember the first 10 arrangements were done by Jose Madera, $10 each. Gave him $100, and did 10 charts. It was great.
Quite a bargain.
Yeah, no kidding. And
well, that must have been a special price for you.
Oh yeah, of course.
You guys were buddies.
Yeah.
Everybody else probably 13.
Right. I know, that's right, $13. But also at that time I was attending Juilliard. That was one of the perks of being in the military. With the VA, they paid for Juilliard. If it wasn't for that, I never would have gone to Juilliard. It was very expensive and all of that. So that was a great opportunity that I took advantage of. And so I began arranging. So Joe did the body of the first 10 charts, and after that I started doing some writing. And then I met Al Santiago. He came to one of our trumpet players, Mike Ortiz, who lived in the Bronx, and was friends with Melody, Al Santiago's daughter. And I told Al, no, come and hear the band I'm playing with, blah, blah, blah. So I remember he came to a gig that we had in the Bronx and said,
Now, did Al Santiago already have a record label at that time?
He was working with these guys from Record Mart. They were creating their own label. He had already, I think sold Alegre.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The Alegre record label he made like in the 1958 or something around there.
Okay.
And then he had sold it to Fania, because Fania was buying up all the subsidiaries, Tico and like that there. They were becoming the giant that they became.
I see.
And so Al produced what I called the brother and sister albums. It was like Tambo and Yambu and Saoco. Those are his first 3 productions.
Yambu was Milton
Hamilton. That was Ramon Rodriguez's band.
Felipe?
Yeah, Felipe the singer. That's right. Yeah.
Wasn't Felipe a trumpet player?
He played trumpet, but he sang really chorus. Like on the album, I don't think he played trumpet on the album.
Okay.
Once he started like a local band, like Friends, and so he played well enough for there. But I think that when the recording came on, they got other trumpet players.
Now, was Ramon Rodriguez in the band?
Yeah, he was the bass player and he was the leader and the musical director.
Oh, he was the leader.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's part of another story, but that's how we met.
Okay.
Because we were both in the sessions at the same time and remixing and all that with Al and all that kind of business. And Tambo was fairly successful. I mean, we didn't have a big hit record on it, but we developed a reputation because it was a real good band. And then Phil Peters gave us a break, and we were like the opening acts for all his Marion Manor and Marion Mansion gigs, and we would open up, and it would be Bray Barretto and Tito and Eddie, and also we got a lot of exposure.
Cool.
During that period. It was really nice. And at that time, Willie Colon was hot, and there was a lot of like the smaller groups, because you remember for the years before that, the model was the big bands. And now the groups had gotten smaller, and Joe Cuba had begun that thing with the sextet, and there were smaller conjuntos like that there. But so our model of Tambo was more like a Latin jazz group, paying tribute to like all our influences, Machito, Tito Puente, Dizzy Gillespie, that kind of thing.
What was the instrumentation of
Tambo? Tambo was 2 trumpets, a trombone, a tenor, and a baritone.
Wow.
Yeah. That was kind of one of the first bands to have that combination. Yeah. And that was interesting. I had that band for like 5 years. And during the reason I left the band was I started playing with Tito Puente. And then playing with Tito, I was always on the road and got real busy, so I left the band. I left the band to Johnny Mendra and Bertiga. Yeah, they took the band over. Yeah.
And how long did you play with Puente?
I was with Tito 5 years, that period. From 76 to like 80, 81. Yeah.
How was that?
That was great. I mean, Tito's one of my heroes. So that was a pretty impressive beginning in terms of playing that. And then the other thing, as you know, the 70s was like the heyday of, there were a million clubs, a whole bunch of bands, and everybody was working. I mean, there was a 3-year period with Tito that I did not have a night off. It was every day, every day, every day. As a matter of fact, the only time we got a night off is when we were on a road to California or something, and we would do 3 or 4 days and have a couple of days off, But here back in the city, every day was a different place. During the week we would play for the Italians and the Jewish guys and all the Mambo Nicks. They would go like the Pan Am, the Hadar and Staten Island, different places. Every day was a different place. And then on the weekends, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we would play the Latin club, Cabo Reño, Corso, like that. Yeah.
So that was more or less from what year to what year, those 5 years that you were...
That was, I started with Tito in the end of 75. Yeah. And one of my great, great moments for me in my musical career, aside from, playing with Tito, my hero, was, he did an album called La Leyenda. And at that time, the singer in tambor was Junior Toledo, who was singing with Willie Rosario. But Willie Rosario moved to Puerto Rico, so Junior was still here, so he joined tambor. And he was a very prolific composer, so he wrote some tunes and I did some arrangements. And then one day we did a gig that Tito's band played, and Jimmy Frisada heard one of the songs. It was called Amor en Serio, and he liked the arrangements. He said, "Oh, write it for the band, and we'll play it." So we did that. So we did that recording La Leyenda, and I had my first chance to do an arrangement for Tito Puente, and it got recorded.
Cool.
And on top of that, it was at that time that people weren't given credit. Tito Puente and all the big, you wouldn't see credits on the albums. But because this was a Louie Ramirez production, he did an arrangement of, he did the title tune, La Leyenda, written by Ruben Blades. So since he had to give Louie Ramirez credit, I got credit too.
Nice.
So here's my first recording and all that. and that was Tito's first Grammy-nominated album.
Nice.
Yeah. So it was quite an experience.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So you said you started in 85, so till 1980.
Right. And then I left Tito. My daughter had been born. She was born in 76, and then I had decided. Then what happened was, as I said, I met Ramon, in 75. And Ramon was starting a performing arts division of the Boys Harbor. The Boys Harbor was a boys camp started in 1937 by Tony Duke. And it was for, underprivileged inner city kids to go out and camp and get fresh air and swim in the lake and that kind of stuff. So they developed this community-based organization called the Boys Harbor at that time. And their offices was on 94th Street between Madison and Fifth Avenue. And at that same time on 94th Street, between Park and Madison, there's an armory there, which is now the Hunter High School. And we took over a few of the rooms there, and we started this, the Performing Arts division of the Boys and Girls Harbor. It was started by Ramon Rodriguez and a lady by the name of Sandra Owen. And then me and Ramon got together because we used to rehearse, this is funny, on 11th Street at the 3rd Street Music School.
I remember that.
Yeah, it was on 11th Street.
I remember.
I don't know how that happened, but yeah. And that's what we used to rehearse. And then me and Ramon would get together and he said, wow, we should, I'm starting this performing arts school. Should come over and start teaching, Latin percussion. percussion because that wasn't happening at the time. And I said, oh, that's a terrific idea. Let's do that, you know. And then the only problem was that I was, you know, beginning to work with Tito, so I was going to be on the road a lot. But I wanted to start the program and get it going. And during that period, it started developing, you know. And one of the first obstacles we had was there was no music. You know, like all the high schools back then had Count Basie stock charts and Ellington and Glenn Miller and those kind of things. But in terms of Latin music, there was no music. Right. And since I was playing with Tito and Joe at the same time, and Tito would say, oh, you know, we're going to play this chart, but there's a trumpet part missing, and there's the saxophone that got missing the third page. So that's how we started getting charts. So I would take the charts and fill in and do the second trumpet or whatever, and Joe, and then we'd make copies, and we'd keep the copies and give the originals back to Tito, and then, you know, Tito saw that we were using them for, you know, for the classes, for the school, and Tito was always, you know, championing for us to, because, you know, we were trying to do this thing, develop the performing arts. And so that's how we started collecting music. And the same thing, at the same time I was playing with Machito, I remember Mario Bauzo, the same kind of problem. They bring out a new chart, oh, there's no piano part. And there was tons of Machito charts that had no piano parts. Because, of course, Rene and those guys, they had that memorized after being all those years. And so, but, well, you know, after Rene left and all that, with newer piano players, you had to have a piano parts. So then, you know, that's how Joe got a lot of the charts. That's how I got a lot of the charts. We would write the piano parts or missing bass line parts and that kind of thing.
I see. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, so that's how we began the original collection of the material for the school.
I see.
And then after that, you know, doing transcriptions, you know, off the records and like that there. That's how we started developing the library.
Something that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I want to mention, because a lot of people who are listening don't know the importance of Boys Harbor. I mean, we're getting to that, but I just want to emphasize that. Most of you know, many of you know that New York City has been an important place for the development of the music that we call salsa. And the fact that this school that you guys had was probably like the premier place for people to be able to, for young people, you know, who didn't have money, inner city kids, to be able to start learning about our music. And the fact that you guys had that in getting the charts from Machito and Tito Puente, it's not the usual way people go about getting
right.
stuff like that, but it's amazing. I'm hearing this now for the first time, so it's unbelievable how it happened. So Boys Harbor, a lot of young musicians went there to study, still do. Also, you guys have facilities where bands rehearse, and some of the top bands in New York still rehearse in Boys Harbor. Occasionally when there's artists from out of town that come to New York and they have a New York band that's going to back them up, they rehearse in Boys Harbor. It's not the fanciest of places, but it's
in the community.
It's unique,
yeah.
And you know, it's like the first place people think of when they want to rehearse. When I had Fascinacion, that was the main place where we used to rehearse, and still a lot of bands that I play with, when they do rehearse, it's at Boys Harbor. And there's a lot of young musicians who have learned how to play Latin music because of Boys Harbor. And there's a few Latin musicians who are already professionals who teach there, and you know, it facilitates the continued life of our music.
Yeah, because aside from the workshops and all that, we also have the private lessons, which is something else that, you know, you can't get at Juilliard or all of the other fantastic, you know, places that are in New York City. You know, we were the first one to dedicate to Latin American music per se as an art form. You know, and you know, teaching bass players and pianists and horn players. I mean, we've had everybody at one time or another teach there. Leopoldo Piñera for years was the trombone teacher. And, Jose Madera taught there, Frankie Malavia taught there, Little Ray Romero, Frankie Colon. Now currently we have George Delgado there also. But a lot of people went through there, Johnny Almendra. When we had after the Mariel boat lift, when a lot of the Cubans came here, a lot of the folklorists, some of them taught there also, Roberto Borrell, Lázaro Galarraga. So it's been a nice mix of not only the commercial but also the folklore.
Did Jason Villamar
Yes,
study there?
Yes, he was one of my prominent students there for many years.
Who was the piano teacher at that time?
His classical piano teacher was Martin. Martin was Soderbergh.
Okay.
Was the head of the classical department, and he was Jason's teacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, Jason Villamar is probably the most talented young piano player in the New York City scene, and he's very versatile. He's already a master of the Latin, and he's a great jazz player. So, I just wanted to mention him because he's a great example of the type of musicians who have come out of Boys Harbor.
There's also, for another example, currently Eddie Palmieri's timbalero.
Camilo
Molina. Molina. His mother brought him to me. He was 4 years old, and so he grew and grew, and he's a fantastic musician. Mm-hmm. Knows a little of everything of the folklore. Plays all of the instruments. Plays the batatas, the shekeres, knows the songs, the material, and so he's a well-rounded musician. Yes.
So, you said you started there around 76?
Yeah, 75, 76.
Okay,
yeah.
so it's going on 40 years.
Yeah.
It's just about 40 years for you. And it's still going okay?
We're still going concern. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned something to me yesterday about you guys started collecting stuff, and you developed kind of a museum or a collection. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Okay, that would be the Raíces collection. And like as I said earlier, I've always been a collector all my life. It began, of course, with albums, with records, and the 78s and all of that. But I was always also what you call a cultural historian. I was a collector of information. Whenever I was in a band, I would speak to the older musicians about this and the history and when they started. And I was always interviewing people per se. And while we developed a rapport, with the help of Tito and Machito and Johnny Pacheco and all the musicians that used to rehearse there, Ray Barretto, we developed a reputation for being honest in our dealings with all of the families. I mean, we never, the arrangements and all of that, we never took advantage or made any money on it. It was always for the students, for the student body to use. And what happens is people pass away, and what's very important to a lot of people, photographs and 78s and all that, to the next generation might not be as important. And so we became like the caretakers in the community. People would always bring us, I got all these LPs that my mother had with all these trios and all of that. So we would just take them on. And I got these photographs that my father had, and I really don't know what to do with them, that kind of. And so we just became like a repository for a lot of the things in the community. And of course, we didn't have space for it. We started putting stuff in closets, and then it got to a point where we said, guess what? We don't have any more room. So then it became, well, we have to make this an entity, and started. We got what's called a CO1, 501c3. To make it a non-profit organization, and we got a charter, a museum charter, and then we started getting grants, from National Endowment of the Arts, from the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone, from the Smithsonian, and like that there, and so we developed a space, and we had a climate-controlled room, and bought the proper air conditioning and everything. So, and then what happened is then the collection just started getting bigger because people would come to the room and say, wow, you guys mean business. You know, so I guess this is where I wanna, you know, donate our stuff. I mean, one example is we have Vicentico Valdez's entire collection, all his music.
Really?
Photographs, albums, trophies.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was, you know, when he passed away, his family was looking for a place to put, you know, some use, and that's how we received that collection. Also, years before that, we had received a Miguelito Valdez collection from his wife after he passed away, and they were out in California. And through the help of Joe Conzo and Tito, we were able to get that material also. So, you know, that's how it began, and once we had our charter, then we stopped being a collection, we actually became a museum. And so right now we're in the process of looking for a space because it just grew so large.
I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah,
What's the current status of all that?
Yeah.
Those grants that you mentioned, those, to my understanding, those are usually temporary, right? So,
Yeah, they're always like a 3-year plan or something, and after a while you're supposed to use that money to get better, put yourself at another level. Then eventually you're supposed to be self-sufficient. Supposedly, that's how that's supposed to work. I mean, you know, once you're non-profit status, doesn't mean you can't make any money, but you have to maintain a certain level to maintain the organization to continue getting grants.
I understand.
So right now the situation is that we need another space. And then over the years, of course, we've had like 20 major exhibitions. The first exhibition was like in 1982 at the Spanish Center on Park Avenue in the 70s. And then we've had various traveling exhibitions to the National Jazz Museum, to the Smithsonian. And the last major exhibition we had...
Smithsonian in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah. We became a Smithsonian affiliate in the year 2000. And with help from the Smithsonian, they gave us a few things. We had the Celia Cruz Rumba dress that they had on national tour. They loaned that to us when we did our exhibit at the New York Museum of the City of New York in 2000.
That's really impressive.
Yeah.
So, Raíces is you, Ramon. Is there anyone else involved?
Well, there's a board. Larry Hall is one of the board members.
Okay.
Right. But me and Ramon Rodriguez is the director, and I'm the curator. But we're the co-founders.
I gotta figure out a way how I can get Salsa Legends and Masters Academy people to see some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's what I'm trying to do too, is to educate the people and teach about the history and the legend of the masters. So sounds like a lot of that stuff you have is something that people would like to know about. So
yeah.
I'm gonna have to.
Yeah, we have some plenty of things from Tito Puente, timbales, some shekeres. We got one of his uniforms. We got a Machito uniform, Tito Rodriguez uniform. Some maracas that Machito gave us, and different things. We got Lou Perez's collection, all his photographs. And Lou Perez, I found out, you know, once we received the collection, I never knew this, that he was Miguelito Valdez freak. Yeah, that was one of his idols. And he gave us this book that he'd been collecting, every clipping that he could find on Miguelito Valdez. And the book is like this big, and it's like 500 pages. And it's got all these magazine articles and newspaper clippings and advertisements. It's all Miguelito Valdez. Really interesting.
For people who may not know, Lou Perez, was this biggest hit, Aprieta el Pollo?
Yeah.
Aprieta el Pollo.
Aprieta el Pollo, yeah.
I got to play with Lou a couple of times.
Yeah, he was a musician for, you know, he had a band from the 50s through the 70s and the early 80s in New York City. Different incarnations, a conjunto, a big band, but mostly a charanga.
Mostly charanga.
Yeah, mostly charanga, yeah. And unfortunately, we lost him in an accident. He was jogging one day.
I know.
Really sad.
Shit.
Yeah.
What else do you want to Share with us.
Well, I mean, although one of the beauties of working at the school, Ramon also being a musician, he understood that, that in order to maintain the high standards of the education part of the history of Latin music and the performing aspects of it, that your teachers had to be performing musicians. So he was always flexible in terms of, me or any of the other teachers going on the road or canceling lessons at the last minute because a recording popped up or a jingle or something like that. So he was really flexible in that, and that really helped.
Ramon I'm talking like he's a sweetheart. He always has been relaxed, accommodating, no friction or tension. I never saw him upset, I love Ramon. As a matter of fact, I want to see if I can interview him as well at some point soon. So.
He'd love to do it. Yeah.
Good. We're talking about Ramon Rodriguez, who was a bass player in Yambu that we mentioned earlier.
Right.
And he's done, had an important role as far as Boys Harbor and Raíces and the music. So, thank God for people like Ramon and yourself. What else, Louie?
Well, then, as I was saying, my career continued after playing with Tito, and then Johnny Pacheco and Hector Casanova, and Larry Harlow, and Peter Conde, Hector Lavoe, Dizzy Gillespie, Eddie Palmieri. That was one of the highlights. Eddie Palmieri was also one of my heroes, especially that band.
Me too.
Yeah, and I was with Eddie on his first European tour. We went to Amsterdam and Paris, and that was really a great experience. I mean, just playing with Eddie, his creativity and his...
Amsterdam, was that by any chance the North Sea Jazz Festival?
No, this was before that.
Before that.
Yeah, this was before that festival. This was 1981. Wow. And what happened with that was, at the time, the conga player was Daniel Ponce. But he didn't have the papers, so he couldn't travel. And so Little Ray, me and Little Ray were friends for a long time, and he was working at the school, and he was also playing in I had a Afro-Puerto Rican folklore group called Carambu. We do bomba and plena. We used to do demonstrations.
That's where your email address.
Yeah, that's where it came from. Yeah. And so he told Eddie, "Oh no, bring Louie Bauzo," and and Eddie was always on the forefront of using bata drums and all that kind of thing, just developing. And so I went on that trip in place of Daniel Ponce, and it was me, Little Ray, and Charlie Cotto. That was interesting. The bass player was Eddie Resto. Yeah, Tony Cofresi was on that band. What's his name? Junior Vega. Yeah, was on that band. Yeah, and that was one of the last tours I think that Ismael Quintana did. Yeah, and that was really, Pat was always one of my favorite singers, so that was quite an experience.
Nice guy, too.
Yeah, very lovely person. Yeah.
So now you're with playing with Larry Harlow. Are there any other bands you're working with?
Yeah, well, I also spent 2 years with Mongo Santa Maria. Again, another one of my heroes. It's funny when you're a kid and you're playing and you're listening. Like I said, before I started teaching, or in a how do you say, in an educational environment, there was nobody doing that. You'd have some people who you make friends with, and they would give you some lessons, kind of thing. But there wasn't a structured environment for teaching this music, it's in particular the Latin percussion. And so the experiences at the school and all of that helped facilitate, making other friends and being known throughout the world. We had students come I have had students come from Japan, from Africa, from Europe, from South America, that have always come to the school because they heard about. So people would come in, it's sort of like an exchange program, or come in and stay for 6 months and study at the school, and.
Jerome.
Jerome, he's from Luxembourg.
Luxembourg.
Yeah.
I've actually hung out with him in Luxembourg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He came to the school I guess in the 90s, 20 years ago, and now
he did the off-Broadway show Quien Mató a Hector.
That's right.
For a
Yeah.
while.
And matter of fact, he's in Luxembourg now. And he comes back and forth, and he also teaches at the school. He teaches part of we have an after-school program.
Yeah?
Yeah, they teach, we have Mondays and Wednesdays. We have the after-school program. We got a pre-teen program, which is at 4 o'clock, and a teen program at 5 to 6. And I teach the Mondays, and Jerome and Greg Askew teach the Wednesday class.
I actually went to Jerome's mother's children's clothing store.
Oh yeah, that's right, in Luxembourg.
Yeah, he's a really nice guy.
Yeah,
He's a sweetheart. Yeah.
Terrific musician.
Yeah.
He went to Cuba, and he came here and studied with me for like 5 or 6 years. And now he's part of my crew. He plays in my folklore groups.
Does he?
Yeah, and he plays in my with my tambor. I have a fundamento. We play ceremonies, the Yoruba tradition in New York City, and he plays in that group also. Yeah.
So when he's in Luxembourg, he teaches out there.
Yeah,
right?
he teaches, and he does workshops, and he works with different bands. Yeah.
Very cool. So, what else do you want to share with us?
Well, aside from playing the Latin bands, I recorded with Paul Simon, Manhattan Transfer, the Bob Mintzer Big Band with Pete Yellen. It was a good friend of mine. I met him in the Tito Puente Orchestra, and he lived like 3 blocks from my house in Brooklyn before he moved out to California. He's out somewhere in California now. And but when also a lot of other musicians like Marcelino Guerra performed with him, or Mauricio Smith did a lot of jingles with Mauricio in the 80s. Mauricio was connected with Julio Gutierrez, and they were doing a lot of jingles and commercials and those kind of things. So went through that long period with that, like 5 or 6 years, doing jingles every week, and that was a busy period for us.
And back in those days, at the end of the year, you'd get the fund check.
Yeah, the residuals.
Yeah.
Well, with the TV shows and all of that. Yeah.
I did a little while. Harlow also was in that clique, and we used to do jingles back then. Those were good times. It's not. I haven't been in that clique for a while.
Yeah, no, that scene has changed also.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that work has gone to California. Yeah, in that terms. And talking about Larry, the way I started playing with Larry was I was good friends with my good friend Frankie Malave, and Frankie Malave was every once in a while he'd get another gig or something, and I was his sub, and that's how I wound up in the band when Frankie left. Yeah, originally. So
we got a gig later, so I'm going to ask you maybe 1 or 2 last questions. You mentioned at some point you're going to retire from the daily Boys Harbor thing, and you aspire to travel around and do, would it be seminars or?
Well, a combination of seminars, lecture demos, workshops, because I've been doing the workshops for 25 years. I have the big band on Mondays, and I have the smaller groups Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, different levels. I have a youth ensemble on Wednesday, which is right now I have 4 what I call kids. You know, they're young teenagers, bass player, piano player, violinist, and 2 vocalists.
Is that the one that my friend Steve is a part of, or is that a different one?
No, Steve is in a more advanced workshop.
Okay.
Yeah, he does the Tuesday workshop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, cool, Louie, man. Thank you for taking the time.
I
learned a lot about you that I didn't know, and I'm even more impressed than I was before. So
Thanks, great.
I appreciate you taking the time. I hope, I know that this series, Salseros, have learned a lot, and some of you who may not have known who Louie was before, now you know. So
thank you for being patient with us and listening in.
Yeah. It's all about keeping the music alive, and people like Louie are important, so it's a treat for me, and hopefully you guys appreciate it too. Salsa Legends and Masters Academy exclusive interview with Louie Bauzo. Thanks, Louie.
Thank you. Good.